Thank you for downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
Who are you as a human being? And more importantly then, who are you as an individual? This is an extraordinary privilege that God has given to us to understand the generic nature of humanity and at the same time to understand the particularity with which we live.
We know more about the human body today than any other generation in human history. But does understanding the human body mean we understand what it means to be human? That's our topic today on Just Thinking with author and apologist Ravi Zacharias. Gandhi once said, "I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." What causes some Christians to look less like Jesus and more like the world? Let's join Ravi Zacharias this week as he explores the connection between worship and discipleship.
Some time ago, Johns Hopkins invited me to come and speak on the theme, what does it mean to be human? And they gave me about a 3-year lead start, and I got quite tickled by it, actually, and I knew the inviting gentlemen very well. I'd ministered for them in different settings, and they are professors at Hopkins. And, I jokingly said, isn't that funny? Here we are, the year is past 2000, and we are still trying to figure out who we are. What does it mean to be human? You don't hear of dogs getting together to define dogginess. Cats trying to figure it out. As far as we know, chimpanzees are not doing that. We're supposed to be the highest end of this totem pole, and we don't know who we are. If we don't know what it means to be human, what does humanism mean? How did we develop all these humanistic theories when there is no ontic referent, no point to refer back to in terms of the very foundational definitions? And they had actually invited Nobel laureates like Elie Wiesel and some of the others. They were bringing all kinds of representative views. Hopkins, of course, one of the leading institutions in genetic engineering and the whole movement that deals with that field of study. And so these two gentlemen were behind it. They were devoted Christians. They didn't know how to go about it, but they got permission for sort of the Judeo-Christian worldview to be represented in what I would present. And at the end of it, when the talk was over and you saw some of the hostile exchange I had with that other professor of medical ethics as we finished chatting and so on, and I didn't know where we would go with all of this. There were several speakers. Then a few days later, we got a call from somebody at the University of Chicago speaking on behalf of the Journal of Science and Medicine, saying they had gotten together and decided they wanted to publish my article in that journal on how it was presented as to what the Judeo-Christian worldview is on being human. But I want now to talk about the privilege we have before this world that is so confused about all definitions on telling them what the Bible tells us about being human. The Psalms give us a clear picture of this. David said it a good 1,000 years before Christ. When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? The son of man that you care for him? You made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor. What is there in man that you take note of him? Or the son of man that you visit him? What is it about you, about me, that God takes note of and that God claims authorship of? A tragic accident took place at Taylor University's confines nearby. My son Nathan graduated from Taylor, and we have 4 or 5 Taylor grads on our staff. And so we were deeply affected by that tragedy. You know how they were coming home that night? They were hit by this truck driver who'd crossed the median, gotten to the other side of the road, and I think 4 or 5 of them were killed, maybe 4 students and 1 campus worker. And then a different kind of scenario unfolded. A young woman by the name of Laura Van Ryn was said to have survived the crash, terribly disfigured. And there she was in the bed. All the others had their funerals. And the Van Ryn family, day and night, attending to their daughter's bedside, along with their fiancé. And then some confusion began to unfold. When they were finding out, her answers were not making sense. They wondered if it was some damage to the brain, but the fiancé kept saying something's not right. And as they began to talk to her, the young woman coming to said, "I'm not Laura, I'm Whitney." They said, "No, you're not Whitney, you're Laura." This went on till finally confusion came, dental records were brought, and they found out that what actually happened is that Laura had not been spared that accident, she had been buried, and it was Whitney that had been spared. And the 2 sets of parents now, one looking at the dark clouds over the past few days, now suddenly being told the sun is behind it and rising, one who had been told that it was a bright day for them, their daughter had been spared, suddenly finding out that she'd already been buried. What an incredible story to have taken place in one of the most technologically sophisticated nations of the world. It was hitting the wires all over the world. I was somewhere in Thailand or Singapore hearing this story. And the question is this: who are you as a human being? And more importantly then, who are you as an individual? This is an extraordinary privilege that God has given to us to understand the generic nature of humanity, and at the same time to understand the particularity with which we live. The Buddhists would tell you it didn't really matter, because there was no such person as Laura Van Ryn in her individuality. There was no real person as Whitney Sirac, because Gautama Buddha denied the nature of the ego and the individual. Buddha said the self is an illusion. There is no such thing as an essential self. He called it the anatman, and he borrowed that term from Hinduism, which talked of the essential self as the atman. Buddha talked about it as the anatman, the non-self. And so in the Buddhist doctrine of reincarnation, no self arrives after death. It is an accretion of karma that resurfaces in another body. There really isn't a self. So in Buddhist idea, your idea of self is an illusion. In Hinduism, your self transmigrates into a different form, be it animal or a superior caste. Somehow that self gets mutated or permeated with some other ideas, so that the Atman is ultimately reduced again to what they call a nothingness. In the Hindu scriptures, the famous illustration is, you look at the tree, yes. You look at the fruit, yes. You take the pulp out of the fruit, yes. Open it up and take the seed, yes. Break open the seed, what do you see? Nothing. The famous line of the Hindu is, Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. Out of the nothingness in the inside of the seed emerges the tree. There is no real transmigrating self. You move from caste to caste or animal to human. And essentially in Jainism, which developed, there was no real difference in kind between a mosquito and a human being. I've talked to Jain writers who tell me that. What about the humanists? The humanists tell us we are the random product of time plus matter plus chance. We just happen to be here. And this happened with no prevision in mind. Listen to the one-time Harvard scholar Stephen Jay Gould. who said this: "We are here because one odd group of fishes had a peculiar fin anatomy that could transform into legs for terrestrial creatures, because comets struck this earth and wiped out dinosaurs, thereby giving mammals a chance not otherwise available to us. So in a real sense, thank your lucky stars. Because the earth never froze entirely during an ice age. Because a small and tenuous species arising in Africa 250,000 years ago has managed so far by hook or by crook to survive. We may yearn for a higher answer, but there is no such thing. This explanation, though superficially troubling, if not actually terrifying, is ultimately liberating and exhilarating. We cannot read the meaning of life passively in the facts of nature. We must construct these answers ourselves from our own wisdom and ethical sense. There is no other way. It just happened because a creature with a fin anatomy happened to survive the contingencies of the climatic conditions, and here we are. You know, Malcolm Muggeridge said we have educated ourselves into imbecility. He's right. Listen to this paragraph in Time magazine. It talks about the fact that there's a 98.2 or 3% similarity between the chimp and the human being. There's only a 1.23% difference in the DNA. Did you hear that? The difference, and this was pointed out at Johns Hopkins, by the way. There's only a 1.23% difference between the human DNA and a chimpanzee's DNA. But listen to this. Yet tiny differences sprinkled throughout the genome have made all the difference. Agriculture, language, art, music, technology, and philosophy, and all the achievements that make us so profoundly different from chimpanzees and make a chimp in a business suit seem so deeply ridiculous, are somehow encoded within minute fractions of our genetic code. Nobody yet knows precisely where they are or how they work, but somewhere in the nuclei of our cells are handfuls of amino acids arranged in a specific order that endow us with the brain power to outthink and outdo our closest relatives on the tree of life. They give us the ability to speak and write and to read, to compose symphonies, to paint masterpieces, to delve into the molecular biology that makes us what we are. Very little difference, isn't it? We compose symphonies, we write dictionaries, we do languages, we speak, we do all this with a 1.23% difference out of the 3 billion pieces of information in the human DNA.
While the percentages are minuscule, the differences are not. Ravi will return with more of his message tomorrow. But you can order the entire message today by calling us at 1-800-448-6766. Ask for the Christian Privilege. Again, the number is 1-800-448-6766. You can also order online at www.rzim.org. To send us any questions or comments or to make a donation by mail, write to RZIM, Post Office Box 921-939, Norcross, Georgia 30010. Just Thinking is a listener-supported radio presentation of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Ravi continues his message on the Christian Privilege tomorrow. Until then, keep thinking.